And I had a sudden awakening moment out of nowhere, and all was revealed. All was well. All had ever been well. All this life I'd been having was just a part of a great dream, really, and filled with love. And it was ultimately empty. I saw that it was all insubstantial. The whole universe was present and was made of nothing, and it was mind blowing. And I was part of it. It was beautiful.
Welcome to Living Mirrors with Dr. James Cook. My guest this week is Henry Shukman. Henry is a poet and Zen master. He's the guiding teacher of Mountain Cloud Zen Center in Santa Fe, New Mexico, which is part of the Sanbo Zen lineage. He's the author of One Blade of Grass, Finding the Old Road of the Heart, a Zen Memoir, and most recently, Original Love, The Four Inns on the Path of Awakening. Today, we discuss Zen and our own paths of awakening. Hope you enjoy the conversation.
Okay, I'm here with Henry Shukman. Henry, thanks for coming on the podcast.
Yeah, nice to be with you, James. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, great to have you here. So I wonder if, to begin with, for anyone who's kind of heard of Zen but doesn't have their own definition, how would you describe what Zen is all about?
Okay, I have to say right off the bat that there are different forms Zen takes. So I only really deeply know one of them, and that's the form of Zen that uses koans. And we'll have to get into what they are, to whatever extent you'd like to. But essentially, Koan Zen is really one of its central kind of aspirations or intentions is to help people find selflessness, discover that which is not the ordinary self that feels separate and beleaguered and challenged by the world and by life to try to make its own way in the world as a separate entity. So Koan Zen comes from something that is already before that or beyond that or behind that, which is all inclusive. And the koans are little tools that can help us awaken, quote unquote, to that reality, that is not the consensual conditioned reality, but something you could say smaller, or you could say larger, or no size at all, that includes our consensual reality, and then beyond awakening to that, actually, really, ideally, getting to the point where we can forget all about it and just lead the most ordinary life that is illuminated by it, and I mean, I think that's quite a lot I've said already right there, but
yeah, there's a lot of threads we can pick up on.
Yeah, but I think compared with other traditions, which I've also explored, as a tradition that's interested in this matter of awakening, and of course that would also, we could term it non-duality. It's a little unusual in that it really places value on the world itself, on the things of the world, as teachers of non-duality, and that's one of its distinctive features, and it's probably why it has such a strong emphasis on the arts and on poetry and painting and sculpture and all of the arts, really, as means to help us awaken to that, because it sort of thinks the world itself is all awakening, and it's only us that can be a little slow on the uptake and haven't got it yet.
Yeah, that's really interesting, because I feel like the average person who's not into this stuff, when you say Zen, they may actually just think of an aesthetic. So they may think of that, whether it's a Zen garden or a way of arranging rocks or a painting. So that's very interesting, that you make that connection, that there's actually something in the, you could say, philosophy or the way it's approached that actually would lead to that abundance of kind of creative output.
I think there is. It's interesting you say that about the aesthetic, because I've sometimes thought how the way Zen arrived in the West was like in the mid 20th century. It was big with the beats, the beat poets, Gary Snyder, Jack Kerouac, and Allen Ginsberg. They were all Zen practitioners. They were really into it. So that was poetry, as a vehicle really that helped bring Zen over. And then you had this next phase. It was I think it was basically the 80s when it showed up in a sort of very clean, chic look in restaurants, like sushi restaurants and stuff.
Right.
There was a sort of yuppie chic. I know the term yuppie is gone, but it was a big thing in the 80s when I was just becoming an adult. And it was all about crisp, clean, sparse, and spare interiors.
And so you were at a sushi restaurant one day and you thought, I want some of that, whatever that aesthetic is. That's what I'm going to dedicate my life to. Yeah. I think both of us actually, after reading your most recent book, we both share in our teenage years this enthusiasm for people like Gary Snyder and Kerouac and the Beat Generation, and that they had a big influence on me. Hanshan you mentioned as well, and I remember reading Gary Snyder's translations of Cold Mountain poems as a teenager, and I had the only place I could get a copy was from my local library. Actually, coming back to me now, I think the copy was published by I think it might have been City Light Books, which was another kind of big player in that kind of scene. And I laboriously photocopied every page of it because I couldn't get a copy to buy, and then like bound it with string, and I still have it actually here. That's like one of my prized possessions.
Oh, that's beautiful. I love his translations of Cold Mountain. I think they're really beautiful. And yeah, I mean, I don't know if we want to segue into that a little bit, but I was I was a teenage poet, and I wanted to live like the kind of lifestyles that were evoked in those early Zen poems from the 8th, 9th century. There were the Beats who were in some ways doing that in 50s, 60s, 70s America, or kind of something like that. The life of wandering and odd jobs and placing your moment by moment experience as a higher value than some long-term planned career path, that actually you could let that go and you could still get by and you could have a much richer life for it. That was the ideal then. That was, the counterculture of those times was really bringing that forward. And I was a kid at that time, and I grew up basically as in the 70s, really. Born in the 60s, but really sort of beginning to develop some sense of myself and life and stuff in the 70s. And that was really present then. And I'm really grateful that I caught that in my childhood, because, I imagine you're obviously, I could see right away, obviously you're younger than me quite considerably. So you would have missed that. But just as somebody who is a child of the 70s, the 70s are often kind of like this, criticized decade, it's sort of really dull and naff and, I don't know, in lots of ways, big, wide, flared collars and all that sort of stuff, and and lapels, and but actually, there were things in it that were really good values, like it wasn't all about materialism, that really swung back in the 80s. And I'm glad that I had a childhood and a youth where I was exposed to other ideas of what life could be, what kind of a quest really life could be. And I think it's, and the fact that, of course, poetry could be an expression of that. But gradually I started to realize what's behind that poetry is something else. Like, they weren't just in pursuit of poetry. They were they were using that poetic lifestyle in pursuit of something else, which was like something really kind of scintillating and wild about what life actually was.
Yeah.
I got wind of that. Yeah.
I think that particular moment, the kind of San Francisco Renaissance in the 50s of the poets there, like Gary Snyder, people like Alan Watts going off to Japan. And I think that for a lot of, like, the 60s obviously had such a kind of crux in, I think, the 20th century, especially in kind of American culture. And I remember reading some people kind of speculating that it seemed to me that things like psychedelics lend themselves quite naturally to, there was a big gravitation towards things like Hinduism, Zen, and stuff around the 60s as people began experimenting with psychedelics in California. And I think the common interpretation of that is these states lend themselves to those frameworks, but I've seen people arguing that actually they can lend themselves to other frameworks, and that there'd been a kind of bias seeded in, particularly by people like Aldous Huxley, who was into the kind of Eastern mysticism. And then when you do look at the 50s and the location of California across the water, across the Pacific from Japan, and that you had these kind of bohemian poets interested in Zen, that seems to be absolutely crucial in seeding what became the kind of 60s counterculture, which then, I really think we live in a kind of post-60s world now in terms of culture. So yeah, I think that it's not something that gets spoken about that much. I think that little cluster of poets in San Francisco in the 50s, but I think it's actually had a very outsized kind of influence on the world. And I think it's because, as you say, they were, early 50s America is very boxed in, pinned down, the image we have of it. And then you had these people really yearning for that wildness, that connection to something primordial, and to wake up out of all of that clinging to kind of conceptual, kind of purely superficial artifice, and to find something more raw underneath.
Yeah, I agree. It's interesting. Some of those, those poets who then went to Japan at that time, like Gary Snyder, they suddenly were confronted by this this fact that what they'd been seeking through psychedelics, you didn't need psychedelics for, right, if you had a deep practice. And what the psychedelics might have opened up in them wouldn't be integrated in their lives by psychedelics, but right, by this practice. And their stories are like, I can't remember who it was. It was some Zen master in the San Francisco area in the 60s who, all these hippies were coming to his sessions, and at some point, some of them started wanting to be students. And there's this little story I've heard where, he was in a room with like, a dozen or 24 of these chaps with big beards and long hair, and women with long hair. And he said, look, if you want to really get serious about this Zen, the first thing you guys have got to do is shave. And they were all sort of a bit shocked, but some of them really got into it, shaved everything. And then he met with them again, and he said, now I can see who you are. So, yeah, and something about simplicity. The Zen is it likes simplicity and clarity, and not. That's why I think many of us, I think myself included, what made it attractive compared to other practices that I dabbled in and tried out was that it was also stripped bare. It didn't have a belief system, really. It was really just walk into this rather sparse room, sit down on one of its cushions or perhaps in a chair or bench, and just sit there. That everything is already here. Everything you can ever possibly find, is already here. So rather than elaborate rituals and beliefs, and you don't need any of that. And actually, in the end, after trying a lot of different centers and doing lots of retreats in different contexts, the kind of Zen that I wound up in, on top of what I was saying before, is also incredibly simple. Like, there were no robes, there were no rituals. There was just like, let's light a candle, and let's just sit, basically.
Yeah, I think that coming full circle aspect of Zen is really, as you mentioned earlier, really powerful, because a lot of spiritualities can have a kind of transcendent orientation, which to me ends up fairly universally, I think, feeling a bit like a kind of a last holdout of fixation, of like somewhere you don't want to surrender, where you've pulled back from the world, you're special, there's some distinction going on there. And what this kind of the final invitation of Zen seems to be is this final collapse into ordinariness, into just here and now, not trying to get away, from this, not trying to make it into anything it's not. And it was in the context of Zen that I first, had the idea of just like when you're doing the washing up, Zen is about just doing that fully, being fully present with it. And now, like every time I do the washing up, it's this kind of lightning bolt of presence, of just like, yep, this is it. Like, this is being fully here now, doing this. That's it. Like all the bells and whistles, all the fireworks of the spiritual path, all the highs, all the insights into reality and stuff. Just to be here, fully doing this is if there's an end, that's the end, I guess.
Ultimate reality is this right here now. I went through various sort of ups and downs and mind-blowing experiences on my own path, beautiful revelatory awakenings. And then in the end, I had a much, what Zen regards as a deeper kind of experience. It acknowledges those. It's nice that it does acknowledge and value those awakenings. But there weren't that many. I could count them on two hands easily, the bigger ones, But then there was a different kind of experience, which was much more thorough. It was like really everything fell away. Everything. Even all the experiences I had before, everything fell away. They fell away. There was really, truly nothing. And that was the real nature of things. And that nothing is absolutely infinitely potentiated or something. And it's doing all of this. So once that's clear, there's no need to be in any special state or to have any special realization, because it's obvious that this is it, and I think some people might get to that more easily than I did and might not need to be hit over the head with big experiences to find it. I needed to be clobbered so that I was truly gone and my whole world was gone. And out of that, thereafter, it was obvious that there's nothing to seek. I'd totally found what I'd always been looking for, probably mostly by virtue of the seeker being completely seen through. And I don't know whether Zen particularly kind of endorses or values or agrees with what I've just been saying. But I do notice that some traditions, or at least some practitioners in the West, they seem to be, from a Zen perspective, still a bit hung up on, infinite awareness or
right,
infinite presence. So, and I mean, there's nothing wrong with that. It's awesome that we're interested in that now in the West. It's very, compared with when I was starting out as a teenager, when there was nothing. It was so rare to have. I mean, I couldn't find I couldn't find what I'd experienced myself in an early awakening when I was 19. I couldn't find anything on it anywhere. Nobody seemed to know about it. Now you wouldn't have that problem, and so that's a really good thing. And so it's great that we may be kind of a little bit fixated on that in the West, or just those that still are relatively rarefied portion of the population that is concerned with stuff like this. But man, it's not such a rarefied thing anymore, and that's great. But in reality, I think we can go a bit further in the sense of dropping all of that. And then it is just this.
Yeah, I
that's
completely.
peace. That's freedom. That's peace. That's love.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. So my awakening as a teenager, you could say, felt like an awakening to suchness, non-conceptual nature of myself as beingness, that kind of had that flavor to it. And as such, it felt kind of had a finality to it. It had a sense of like, okay, beingness, that's what I am, that's what everything is. It's all, and beingness is free from any judgment, any struggle, any, when this body dies, beingness will continue. So I felt, in retrospect, very naively as a teenager, kind of felt a sense of, okay, well, there isn't really a path now. Like, that's it. Like, I've seen it, And interestingly, I knew about Zen. I knew about, I knew that they had words for this stuff. I knew the word Kensho and Satori and all this stuff. I was like, okay, they're talking about this. Very interestingly, I didn't pursue that. I didn't think, well, these people now, I should become a Zen. I did think about becoming a monk, but I didn't. I suspect on some level I had a lot of embodied trauma stuff to work through, and I think just on a gut instinct level, there was a fear to go there, or like a knowing that it needed to be held well, and that I needed, I don't know, just very instinctively. So I spent a very long time until I stumbled into the kind of somatic healing modalities before I started to really integrate this stuff, and then discovered, yeah, that the maps are, the path goes and goes after that, after that first awakening. I think part of me didn't want to believe that when I was at that age. The temptation to feel like you don't have to go into that deep surrender is very appealing. But yeah, no, I mean, like some of the stuff you mentioned makes me think of the 10 ox herding pictures in Zen. Is that something that's used in your tradition as well?
Yes, it is. But before we go there, I'd love to pick up on what you were saying, because I can totally relate to that. And I think you're absolutely right. I mean, in a certain sense, I think one of the characteristics of any sort of, genuine awakening experience, if we can, I don't really like using that adjective, but like a deep enough awakening experience, is that you feel you've seen it all. And you're right. You're actually right. It's just that there's further within us that can come to see it all. And that we may not realize. I certainly didn't. And I'd love to hear a little bit more about yours. I'll just share mine a bit. I was 19, pretty troubled, really, in spite of what I've been saying. I'd had really ferocious skin problem all my life, since I was 6 months old anyway. Very bad eczema. I was hospitalized repeatedly for it. It was horrible, madly itching, often painful, very disfiguring. And I had this sort of little magical spell when I was far from home on a gap year, working in Argentina, actually, and then traveling, backpacking in Bolivia. And I had a sudden awakening moment out of nowhere. And all was revealed. All was well. All had ever been well. All this life I'd been having was just a part of a great dream, really, and filled with love. And it was ultimately empty. I saw that it was all insubstantial. The whole universe was present and was made of nothing, and it was mind blowing. And I was part of it. It was beautiful. And actually, the next step for me was when I went home a few weeks later, after living light as a feather in bliss, really, very tender as well. I went home, and all the unacknowledged trauma of my childhood, it wanted to release itself, but I didn't experience it that way. I experienced it as, oh my God, I've come back to a nightmare. And I'm stuck in it now, and I'll never get out. It was very, very difficult. I had a breakdown, really. I managed to kind of keep going, semi-functional, and I went to university, and I managed to finish the degree, but I was profoundly unhappy. But I never, what you just said about dealing with all this trauma in the body, I think it's a natural thing now that awakening will open us up so that can surface, and it wants to release itself. And so I feel it was very wise of you, I mean, from my perspective, to recognize that, and to recognize that you needed to do it carefully in a supported context. I didn't even realize I needed to do it. I didn't realize it was a natural process that would be healthy ultimately. I just thought, oh no, not only have I lost this incredible reality I've discovered, but I'm going the wrong way,
Right.
And
yeah. I definitely didn't have couldn't have put it into words back then. I guess I'm back projecting a narrative onto the wisdom of the body or my intuitions into not surrendering then, because I didn't. It was only in retrospect I could tell why I didn't want to do the surrender. But yes, because the awakening for me happened with I was ruminating about blind faith and being sent to hell, and because I was raised Catholic, and I think that effectively acted like a koan, in that I was kind of, I had this paradox where this supposedly benevolent creator God was going to torture me forever for not having blind faith. He made me with blind faith, So like, how could I find it? It needs to be authentic. So I couldn't, so I went around and around, and there's what the rational mind couldn't, there just wasn't an answer to this. And I was pouring my entire being into like, I need an answer to this. And I guess you could say it was also kind of metaphysically oriented in terms of like the nature of reality. Like, is this God real? Like, what's going? And then there was this sudden stopping and an awakening where, very similar to as you described, except I would say the love and the emptiness came much later. For me, it was pure. Everything was just being suchness, no separations, utterly okay for all the time, eternally now, no past and future. Deathless thoughts. When the thoughts came back, they were laughable because they were clearly just stories that I could entertain or not entertain, and they clearly were causing me suffering. Why would I entertain them? Like the authority of the adults had completely gone away. It was like they're fallible humans telling me a story that's not, skillful. So screw that story. Like it was so easy after that. But I guess it's like that. I feel like the mechanism of bondage is kind of reified thought, or like ideas about, we take our concepts and we think they're real. There are certain things where we don't think it's a belief. We go, no, that just is the truth. That is the way the world is. And everything you can say that about is always a belief that you're reifying. Where even if it's like you think the world is made of X or I exist or anything, and you go, well, obviously that is true. It's not a belief. That's a truth. No, there are no actual ultimate truths apart from like this that can't be put into words. And so I guess the glitch wasn't whatever glitch happened in my brain, where I felt like a disconnect from that emotional investment in those stories, in those concepts. And so it felt more like fullness. I remember utter kind of absorption, fascination, kind of just in everything, especially in nature. But I remember the plastic chair in front of me at school, just staring at it and I remember thinking like, I don't believe in boredom anymore. I don't think that anyone, like, boredom's a performance. Like nothing in the universe could ever actually be bored. Everything is completely absorbed in itself in the most exquisite way. And then like boredom's just this little story we have. And, then that went away. And then, for me, it was actually through psychedelics, I stumbled into the emotion space and kind of somatics, and then managed to kind of integrate more. And that led later to an opening up to kind of heart-opening love, kind of transpersonal love awakening, and then a more abiding non-duality, like lack of separation, and then an awakening. Emptiness came quite late, I would say. And then there was, the nothingness thing you described. For you, was that during jhana practice? I know you're a jhana practitioner.
No, I just did jhana much later, and I find it very interesting, but it never had the impact of. I mean, I think awakening of the kinds you've just been talking about is sort of much more important, I think, than jhana practice. Jhana practice is valuable if it leads to that, but it can just be a sideshow, I think, now.
Yeah.
I love it. I love it. I'm really glad I did it. But there was something I want to say. I loved what you were describing, James. I got to say, beautifully described, and I can very much relate to it. But what was it? There was something in there that I really wanted to just pick up on. There was
the awakening to suchness, and then the heart-opening love part, transpersonal love, and then emptiness, and then we're about to go into the nothingness.
Yes, no, it's about the beingness. The mechanism of bondage is reified thought. That's a superb phrase. I'm going to borrow that. I hope you'll give me permission. I couldn't agree more. That's exactly right. It's so interesting, isn't it? Because when you really think about it, the words are exactly right. Mechanism of bondage is reified thought. But what is so astonishing is thoughts that if you try to actually get a hold of how big they are, how solid they are, how much of a bondage they could really be, they're thinner than a reflection on water. However thin a reflection on water is, it's less than a molecule thin, a reflection. It's infinitesimally thin. So are thoughts. And it's just fascinating to me that they can function, as you absolutely rightly say, like a heavy iron chain.
Yeah.
But what are they actually made of? It's just fascinating.
And that's why, if I were to repeat that phrase, I would probably, a more precise term would maybe be ideas or interpretations even than thoughts, because people can think thoughts just mean I'm thinking now, but
Yeah.
yeah, like an interpretation is just like a subtle way of framing something. It's not, there's not even really anything there. It's just like I'm looking at it this way, or like this is how it's an idea I have, it's a
Yes.
belief, it's barely even there. And I was thinking about this today. I was on the drive and I was thinking like how I describe someone, and I was like about emptiness and no self, and I was thinking like, is the self empty? I was like, well, it's even less than that. It's not even that there is a self that is empty. It is really like, this is why people say it's an illusion, or it's yeah, it's not really even that. It's just not there. Like it's the
That's right.
interpretation, the framing that gives the impression. But when you look for it, it just isn't there.
That's exactly right. It's actually never been here.
Yeah.
And that's what we realize when we say like, I see through the self, and meaning actually, no, I see that it's never been there.
Right.
That there's never been anything to see through, actually.
Yeah. And then so the nothingness thing for me happened when, so there was an interesting thing started happening where the visual field became kind of a bit digital, kind of like flickering, which,
What sort of pixelated a bit?
Exactly.
Pixelated?
Yeah. That's described in kind of multiple traditions. And then it was just a sudden noticing. So there was, the flickering, but then suddenly it became really obvious the space in which the nothingness behind the appearance of the flickers. So the flickers, if you think of that as a being or something, and I was like, well, what's it flickering out of? And there was a kind of a going between attention or whatever, just absorbed in between those gaps. And then there was just nothing. And it was it was really like stepping backstage or something, and then being like, oh, because I'd heard people talk about kind of, this kind of awakening to there just isn't anything, it's just nothing. And to the mind, it's just like, well, what do you mean? Like, come on, there's a cup and there's a table. Like, come on, don't be silly. Like, and then when you experience it and the peacefulness and freedom of it, and then the sense of, all right, well, I guess I'll turn back around to the relative and try and see how this interpenetrates with, being and non-being is kind of completely here, and then that's where the journey starts to play out. Which is what I said earlier, like if there's an end, it's that, but it's not an end because it's an ongoing exploration. But yeah, it just happens so naturally. Just
It's on a sort of personal human level. We could say it's an ongoing exploration, and on some a slightly different tweak in the angle would be it's simply an ongoing unfolding. It's an ongoing outpouring. I once had that sort of seeing through between the pixels kind of thing. I recognize that in Zen. Actually, you might find this interesting. They talk about awakening experiences or kensho moments. They're more commonly seeing the emptiness of self or the non-existence of self, and slightly less commonly the non-existence or emptiness of the world. And they say when you open your eyes and you don't see anything, that's another form of kensho. And they say that's a little bit kind of harder to see. It's easier for people to see non-existence of self, but they say actually, really, any experience of awakening, it's actually applying to both self and world. Typically, we'll recognize it more with one than the other, but in fact, it must be both, because this self is really part and parcel with the world it constructs, the world it is creating in its image somehow, or in the image that it creates. And so when it is possible, to have an experience where both of them are gone in one go, they're both gone, and I think that's probably what happened to me, later on in my training, and that was the most helpful thing, because it really, all the other ones for me, I'd have this, really sort of, staggering realization about the nature of things. And somehow, whether it was a week later, a month later, or 6 months later, the old ways would start seeping back in. But that just didn't happen after this deeper one, you know. But I think it's probably also because by then I'd done quite a lot of trauma healing.
Right.
And so I
Yeah, I
love,
think,
to me, somatic work was a key part of that.
yeah, I think it's the same for
It
me,
was,
that the initial awakening was a kind of initial insight, and then there was a lot of somatic. There's two paradigms, I guess. There was the abide, there's the kind of the absolute, but then there was a struggling self who was trying to keep it all together, and then it was the letting go on that very the kind of after the initial expansion, going down into the body and bringing it, letting it penetrate through there was kind of once you let go of those deep levels and you see certain insights, then yeah, they don't click back because, like, so I'd say with emptiness, for like I guess you could say, you know, once you learn a rainbow isn't actually physically there as an art structure, you see it as you understand that every adult looks at it. No adult forgets that and thinks, oh, I'll drive up to that rainbow, like it's there now, you know, or yeah, it's I guess same with like money, where you know people may have heard the sentiment that money is kind of made up in the sense that it only works because we all buy into it, we all give it value because of how we use it. It's empty and it's fabricated. It's, you know, if we all stopped using it, it wouldn't have the same value. And so in the same way, you can come to see a dollar bill as a green slip of paper, and that doesn't objectively have that value. You know, if you're in Japan, well, maybe they might accept dollars somewhere. If you're in a country that doesn't accept, you know, so you've got some yen and you're in Uzbekistan, then maybe that's now just a worthless piece of paper. That can give you that insight into emptiness, and then you can have that with all phenomena, where you realize everything is like that. Everything, the appearances are the appearances, and then all the stuff that we imbue them with is additional and can be played with kind of flexibly, and that you don't have to be. That's another aspect of the bondage. You know, thinking again, reified thought. You think that money is objectively valuable. You mistake the way that you're fabricating the value onto it. You don't notice that. You don't see that. It's just believing it really has it.
yes, that's a great way of putting it. I guess one rider on that that Zen might add is like, but the thing is that once it's clear, once emptiness is clear, then everything becomes beautiful.
Yeah.
You know, you see the beauty much more.
Yeah.
You know, and that's the God, that in a way that's the value of it. You know, that we really, oh my gosh, after all the suffering that we might have been through, you know, in this world, now we can start to see what is so beautiful in this world.
Yeah.
And it's not special things. You know, I remember once when I was somewhere in my, you know, spiritual path. You know, I was in a Walmart, and I was there to buy something for our two boys when they were young, and I was just browsing around, and I was going past these big TVs, and there was on one they were on, you know, some of them were on and big screens, and one of them, it was sitting on its big cardboard box, and on the screen there was a boy band, you know, doing their latest hit. They're all dressed up, they're all dancing around, and it seemed like, what, they're putting on this show. It's also kind of sometimes such an exaggerated display to try to get attention or something. And meanwhile, underneath the TV, there's this big, simple cardboard box. And I just saw so much beauty in the cardboard box, just perfectly being itself with infinite patience. The texture, the color were just gorgeous. And actually, in a way, these guys I ought to be, you know, you might think I would be able to say, well, they doing their thing, that was also beautiful too. But there was a kind of, there was a falseness in what they were trying to present, you know, that the box was completely free of.
That's funny, because I after my kind of awakening to emptiness, I went to a Walmart a few days after and had an experience of it really happened as I walked through the door. It was just the appearance of the whole scene just felt like kind of very light appearances just hanging in nothingness, and it was so beautiful and just a sense of love and of ease and of peace, and just Yeah, we're going to give people the impression that Walmart should be the new temple for some kind of new religious movement now, but maybe they're pumping something in the air in the. Um, but yeah, with the rainbow thing and the beauty thing, I think they're a good example of exactly the point you're making with emptiness. That if you imagine a child, it's because of our attachments to these reified misperceptions. So if you're a child who thinks that the rainbow is a physical art structure and you're obsessed with one day I'm going to go to the end of the rainbow and I'm going to look for the pot of gold, and like that's your dream, like going to Disneyland, you really are obsessed with this, and then someone taps you on the shoulder and goes, by the way, that doesn't exist. A physical art structure like that, it's not over there. If you walk up to it, it won't be there. And then that could be really upsetting for the child. They could go through a bout of real kind of, well, what's the point then of like, if I've anchored all my hopes to that and like this sucks, like they don't exist. And then in adulthood, once you've gotten over that heartbreak of rainbows not being real, they're utterly beautiful and they're a gift. They're just this light, ephemeral display for no reason, just for the beauty of it, that we get to enjoy it. Yeah.
Yeah. And somehow I think for me, that's where some of the love part is.
Right.
It's such an offering, the exercise book on the desk next to me is here. It's presenting itself. It's a gift.
Yeah. And I think that nothingness piece is, also the no self is like the child letting go of the craving after the rainbow, and being open to seeing things as they are. And if you can do that and step through the final thing of letting go of yourself and the world, as you mentioned, it kind of co-arises with the self, and you're okay with nothing, and you just say, all right, like if it's nothing, it's nothing. From the next moment, you're no longer anchoring to the kind of fearfulness of loss in the future that keeps you kind of grasping and trying to hold all the bondage and hold all the baggage now. And instead you drop it. And then the next moment, oh, there's the feeling of breathing. Oh, there's the taste of the water as I drink it. Suddenly this is all just this wonderful expressive display arising for no one, for no reason, just for like the rainbow, just why not drink it in and enjoy it? And that feels like love, just that level of openness and flow and expression.
Exactly. I think of it sometimes as an infinite generosity.
Yeah.
Yeah. They sometimes say in Zen, just picking up on what you just said, there's a saying in Zen often that sort of after somebody's had a deep awakening, in some of the old Zen stories, and they say, now they knew for the first time when they drink water, whether it's warm or cold.
That's great. Yeah, so I think you mentioned kind of infinite generosity. I think as on the path, you can have these insights into reality not being the way you thought it was, or ideas about what reality is, and it's, I think, unskillful to get fixated on those and reify them, but it can be fun as well to play with those ideas. And it does feel to me that infinite generosity, infinite openness, creativity, love is the kind of the wellspring of whatever this is, being reality. And I don't think that's, I think that's a very reasonable thing to say, because I think when I was pushing back against my religious upbringing, that would have maybe sounded kind of supernatural, superstitious, some made up claim, but now it just feels very natural, very obvious that there is.
Yes, and it's well, right, and it's so nice to recognize that without any possible imputing of some other being doing it.
Yeah, totally empty, totally a gift, totally just here and this,
and totally full.
Yeah, I think you mentioned to people, can get attached to these ideas of infinite consciousness, or I think that kind of stuff is yes, I think consciousness too is empty. Co-arises with everything else. So I don't see anything, or it seems impossible to me that anything. I mean, we're just talking here about the reified thought thing again. If you think infinite consciousness exists objectively, you're mistaking your belief that you're holding, that you're attached to, for reality. I mean, even reality, should be held lightly here. But I think that's the surrender thing.
Yes, it's like they, in the end, there's nothing to hold on to, and there's no one to hold. Yeah. But that doesn't mean that all this isn't appearing as it appears. There's a term in Buddhism that's a little bit hard to get one's head around, which is tathagata, which means something like, it's usually translated as that which thus comes, or that which thus arises. And sometimes it's translated as suchness, actually. But literally it means something like that which arises this way, or something like that. But honestly, I could sort of get that, it's fine. But then I heard a master, Sheng Yen, who's a great 20th century Chan teacher. I think he died maybe 10 or so years ago. I've read a lot of his stuff. It's beautiful. And he said, you can translate it as that which arises as if it arises, that which comes as if it comes. Now, all of this is arising as if it's arising. And we must treat it as if it's arising. We too, arising as if we arise, treat it arising as if it arises. So that sort of removes the need to be going any further at that point, going any sort of drilling down any further. Well, is it real? Is it not real?
Yeah, I think that's, again, the maturity of Zen as a tradition feels like the two truths thing of like accepting the conventional as the conventional and not trying to negate it. For me, it felt like I needed to go on this path of the somatic unburdening, even if in the end it feels very kind of like true nature is always just here and it's all very kind of ephemeral and dreamlike. That sometimes people can then back project that and say, there's nothing to do, there's no one to do it, just kind of push away the world. The world's just a dream. And I think the two truths doctrine is really powerful because it kind of, it invites you to that kind of full circle understanding. And then the path ends up being about, I guess, being able to show up in the world with a giggle and kind of a lightness, and then having unburdened the suffering and not needing to say, well, I'll tell you how it is, or I'll tell you what my new doctrines are, or I'll tell you what my dogma is, but just being able to be a kind of, to walk in the mountains and smile and not feel weighed down by your reified thoughts.
Yes, and not feel you have to cling on to some different way of seeing it. There's a little sort of gobbet of Zen wisdom. By the way, I might sound like I'm sort of really all in on Zen. I sort of am, but actually, if you really get Zen, I think Zen has to disappear,
Yeah.
Too. It's not like...
Yeah, I love that.
Zen itself is another construction that could become a bondage if you are too attached to it. But it does have goblets of wisdom. One is, it goes something like this. First, we see... I'm trying to remember the exact right terminology, but basically we see in the relative way, or in the conventional way. Then we see in the universal way. All is present, all universal. And then there's the enlightened way, which is beyond both of those. And you might have heard that saying, before Zen, a mountain is a mountain, a river is a river. During Zen, a mountain is not a mountain, a river is not a river. After Zen, a mountain is a mountain, a river is a river. So we're denying. You could say it's a sort of 3-step negation, or whatever that is. The world as we know it, well, no, and then whoa, all empty. Well, no,
yeah.
Neither. Both.
Yeah. I'm glad you mentioned that, because that's exactly the point I forgot to make earlier with the rainbow example of the child, which is that the child says, oh, great, well, rainbows don't exist. They're completely, I thought it was this real solid physical thing, and you're telling me it's not. Now my new belief is they don't exist. And then the adult looks at it and says, well, come on, like, rainbows refer to something, like, that I can point to it. We can all, so it's neither true to say it does exist or it doesn't exist. It exists interdependently and conventionally. And that's how everything exists. Yeah, I think you need that initial swing away from, with the reification, you need some de-reification to then move beyond the paradigms of either extreme, I think. I had so many questions I was going to ask you about your book, Original Love. I really enjoyed it, by the way. Thank you for writing it. And we're coming towards the end of our time. So for anyone who's interested in how our conversation fits in with the book, would you like to share a bit about it?
Yeah, sure. I'll just say very briefly. I think it fits in quite well, actually, because the book has this underlying metaphor that comes from early Chinese Buddhism that says the path of practice or the path of development or path of realization has two tracks. I mean, it has two wheel tracks. It's like if you imagine an old country road, that's overgrown, you'll see two bands disappearing into the distance with grass either side and also in the middle. It's got these two wheel ruts. And those two wheel ruts are, one is the path of mindfulness. And actually it names it as the Four Foundations of Mindfulness, which is an early Buddhist text about a very systematic, programmatic, developmental path of practice. You gradually explore all these different aspects of your present moment experience in these four sort of buckets, and you work your way through them, and you're gradually getting clearer and clearer, more and more unburdened, and more aware of the three characteristics of everything, which is that they're impermanent, they have no self, and they're liable to cause suffering if we attach to them. And it's developmental, it's gradual and developmental. Meanwhile, the other wheel rut that's with us all along is sometimes called reality, sometimes called principle, and it means exactly what we've been talking about: realization, the true nature of things all along. What I love about this metaphor is that it has both of them all the way. It's like it doesn't leave this need for human development behind, and it doesn't go all in on either. It's like, because it's so common in practice. I mean, the vast majority of meditation practice today is the first wheel rut. It's all about mindfulness for regulating the nervous system, basically, dealing with our challenges. And it's fantastic, but my gosh, it's not the whole story, as you and I know, and many now know. But on the other hand, there's practices like, and frankly, I trained in one of them for a long time. Like, it's all about the awakening. Just, you sit there and one day the lightning is going to strike, but actually I don't think that's totally wise. It'll work for maybe as much as 5% of people, maybe, but for the great majority of us, we need to work on that other track as well. And so the book is based on that premise. So there's two parts of practice, and I sort of break down the first track into foundational mindfulness, and then connectedness as a second aspect, because it's so common that today that people think of their mindfulness as their own little thing they do on their own.
Right.
And, and actually, in many ways, it's all about connection and support and discovering we're already supported in so many ways. And then the third one on that track is flow states, often called samadhi in Buddhism. Samadhi has a different meaning in the Hindu world, but in Buddhism, it means flow and absorption, and jhana practices would fall under that. States that we can come into, which aren't really, that they're distinctly different from how we normally experience stuff, but they're not actually realizations of the true nature of things, but they're beautifully valuable and they're really healthy and good for us. And often I think people might, if they have the choice, they might choose a career that they found that the activity in it has given them flow, and and they wisely choose it. But all of that, in my book, and in my view, actually, is actually distinct from awakening to the non-dual, to the no self, no world, both self and world together as one. And so basically the book covers all those four sort of areas, three of them on one track, and the other on the fourth track, and on the second, the other track, there's always here anyway.
Yeah, I love that, the idea that it's always here anyway, because the pointing to that, because in some of the language reviews we talk about, the path and also like when I was saying about the sense of of it already being done, and then after the initial awakening, the sense of what more could there be to do, is because you wake up to the always whole, always complete nature of everything. And so it's always been that way, waiting for you to discover it, and it will always be that way. So to talk about, if someone were to say, does inherent completion like happen at some point, or does it end at some point, or is there a path that makes it more or less so? It would be kind of absurd. It's just always that way. So it's I like that that's built in from the beginning, that even if you've been just doing the mindfulness your whole life and you're only just hearing about awakening now, that path, the beingness, the empty fullness has always been here supporting you the whole way. I love the bit in your book as well about that kind of gratitude for noticing all the things that are already supporting you in your mindfulness practice. Because it's, for me, that was important when I first realized just how much I was taking for granted in terms of the trees giving me air to breathe and gravity allowing me to be here now. Like all these, people, we can sometimes feel so isolated in the modern world and like we're not getting supported. And that may feel like you're being grateful for kind of crumbs, but it's a whole web of nature that's supporting us and of other humans, seen and unseen, who are helping us live our lives. So I love that you bring in that kind of connection aspect.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, exactly that we're so many systems within this skin bag, and all of those systems are dependent on so many systems outside of this skin bag. There's really just one great field of systems that are all in their own giant single system. Yeah.
Well said. Yeah, I definitely recommend the book. As I've got loads of questions written on the screen in front of me that I just didn't ask you any of, because I loved just going to the heart of the matter. And it's lovely speaking with a similar soul.
Likewise, James. Yeah, beautiful. Yeah, I've got questions that are bubbling up for me, but we'll have to see if we want to do it another time.
Yeah, I'd love that. We should definitely do that. All right, thanks, Henry.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening. If you're watching on YouTube, please like and subscribe. And if you want to help the podcast reach a wider audience, you can leave a review on Apple Podcasts. Finally, if you want to offer financial support, you can go to patreon.com/Dr. James Cook.